What kind of a quack are you? The boy's in the clear.
He's not in the clear. Every time this kid has a dream, somebody in this town dies.
I'd like to apologize in advance for my bad English. I'm from India. I really hope you like this story, and I hope it's not too long. My first paranormal experience I witnessed was when I was around 11 years old, I guess. I was at my uncle's. Me, my mom, and dad visited their place almost every weekend, arriving on Saturday and leaving Sunday evening. On one of these stays, it was pretty much late and everyone was asleep. Me and my parents were on the ground floor room, of which the door was slightly half open. It made it easier to have a clear look out onto the veranda. Being an insomniac, I was up late at midnight, which was not a very good idea, but I had no other choice available, except for staring in the dark or through the slight opening of the room towards the veranda. All of a sudden, I saw this shadow which seemed to appear like that of a tall man wearing a long gown, head covered or something of that sort. At first I was scared, but then I tried to push away those thoughts, and I just assumed it to be some random shadow which could have been formed from anything coming in. But it was either a random stationary thing or actually some person. I swear on this, it definitely couldn't be an animal like a stray cat, and most definitely I can bet on that part. After a while of thinking and trying to understand what exactly it was, I pushed all the thoughts aside and decided to again look in that direction, assuming that it was maybe a suspicious man. A thief, maybe? Sooner or later, I'd have to wake everyone up. As soon as I turned my head to see through the half-open door, I just froze. The shadow changed into what I can only conclude as some kind of skeleton-like figure. I kept staring hard towards whatever it was, and all of a sudden it moved as if it walked forward. I was too scared to wake up my mom or dad to be scolded for making them believe a story that I was making up in the middle of the night, so I just pulled the covers over my face, and that was it. I don't quite understand what it was. I told my mom some months after, but obviously neither of us could make out anything of it. Later, we told my uncle, and he said, yes, we do have a ghost living in our neighborhood. He's fond of our place, and maybe he came to say hi to you. Of course, I didn't have the balls to visit or stay another night there anytime soon. But like I said, I was too young to linger on any such things, and therefore after some months it became a blur, like a distant nightmare. Hence we started visiting like before, and I never once again witnessed anything like that. And trust me, this is not a childhood made-up Goosebumps-inspired tale. It was either some illusion or possibly delusion, but it really happened, and I still have no idea what it was, or why I had to witness it. I'm sharing my story of the homeless man I accidentally took in as a tenant, and the incidents that followed. I'm just saying in advance, this is a long one, but every detail is relevant. Please note, although everything I have documented is factual, the case was never solved and has likely gone cold since this happened more than 10 years ago. So, back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now-closed pub in my hometown. Not a job I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At that time, they'd hired a new kitchen manager that we all simply knew as Kearney. Kearney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barman do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a place of permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenants, so someone suggested he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job may be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Kearney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night, only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Kearney. Honestly, I hadn't even realized he was gay up to that point, but it was water off my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me though was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he'd been sleeping on the street, rather appropriately as I would later find out. Kearney moved in, and Lawrence was there a lot too. It was easy to know when, due to his mobile ringtone sounding like the quacking of a duckling. Kearney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to this story. In particular, number one, he basically never closed his bedroom door. No matter what he was doing in there, it was always open. And two, although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house. Kearney had been living there for about 2 weeks when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye. It being highly contagious, I was given leave of absence from my bartending job and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently I didn't mind giving it to her. Sorry, sis. So the day my sister was scheduled to come pick me up, no, I couldn't drive yet, I took a casual stroll into the bar that myself and Ben, my good friend from high school and at that time coworker, had been building in my house. Something caught my eye. All their liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who had been frequenting my house at that time would know that we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, schnapps, liqueurs. Basically it was a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party without requiring much in the way of additions. So I called Kearney in, asking him what he knew about this, and received feedback that he and Lawrence had been on a slight drinking binge. Those were the actual words he used. That had left me both furious about the thousands worth of stock they had drunk out, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, I said that I'd be dealing with this upon my return. So I was with my sister for a few days, and on Friday I got a call from my local police department, asking me if I knew a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't, and they finally added that I probably will know him as Kearney, and that I should probably come down to the station, as they had just arrested his boyfriend trying to sell my camera equipment. My sister rushed me back home, where all my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It was on this visit that I was informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime, and now had a rap sheet the length of the Bible. The kicker was that both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So while Lawrence was in jail, my sister dropped me off at home, more or less the same time that Kearney got home as well. Based on Kearney's account of what had happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to do to me what he was trying to do. Although I had appreciated his sacrifice, I still told Kearney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all this, however, not wanting to leave his homeless man. Well, homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So Monday comes, and having just completed staff meetings, I walked home to encounter a very much free Lawrence, sitting on the sidewalk across from my house watching it. I confronted Lawrence as to why he was there, and he tried to apologize before begging me for money. Rather out of character, really. I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now I go back to the previous night. See, I had mentioned the staff meeting for a reason, as it was at that meeting where we had gotten a rather sizable list of liquor bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. However, I would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was. A few days later, I opened the garbage bin in my kitchen to see the missing bottles, all empty, staring back at me. I decided to sit on that information for the time being, although I did photograph it just in case I needed it as evidence later. I also called Ben over to inform him of the developments. As this was quickly becoming a detective game, we decided to enter Kearney's room to search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception. 2 single photographs of Lawrence before he had turned into the homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still there, but as Lawrence had spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted that as normal. I should also add at this point that I had mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney and had told him that if I had even suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play, and on that particular night I had been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help himself to draft glasses half full of wine and half full of Coke, which he would go drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, He was still a manager, and we had no right to tell him what he could or could not do. On his fourth trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I encountered Lawrence sitting outside, sharing the half-Coke, half-wine concoctions with Kearney. This pissed me off, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence that I handed over to the general manager. He was also kind of a friend of mine. Although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard the confrontation through the office door when he fired Kearney. Kearney left, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I had been the one who had turned him in. We closed early that night, and I was walking home going past the high school, and I saw Kearney coming from the opposite direction. He walked past me, literally only saying 2 words. "I'm scared." Then he disappeared into the darkness, and that would be the last time that I would ever physically lay my eyes on Conrad Schultz. So we reached the final week before Kearney's eviction was to take place. Ben had come to stay with me for that duration, as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure that nothing else happened. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room, and his door was closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben nor I had caught so much of a peek of him in that entire week, so we hadn't thought much of it at that time. On the day of Kearney's eviction, Ben had gone home for a few hours, and I finally heard Kearney's bedroom door open. Someone walk out, open the front door, and leave. I followed him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. What was left, though, was his house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning on coming back. I took a look at the keys, noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were all in the keychain, there were also several that weren't mine. I mean, why would he leave me the wrong keys? I remember thinking that as I walked into his room. His room was a shock, not because of the state it was in. The 2 had broken his bed in an act of wild monkey sex, but I had known about that already. As I said, he never closed his damn door. But more than that, he had literally left almost all of his belongings behind, with one exception: the 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff left behind. There was one thing that Lawrence left behind, though: his duckling ringtone, which turned out hadn't been so much of a ringtone as an actual duckling, which was now strolling around casually in the vacant room. We named him Neville. Ben returned and got updated about the developments, and both of us were thinking the way he left was rather weird. I mean, of course, the whole thing had been rather weird. It was only when I asked the infamous question that this all became a conspiracy theory. Did you ever actually see Kearney this last week? It was to our shock that we realized that neither of us had, suddenly putting puzzle pieces together. The changing habits, Neville the duck, the wrong keys, only Lawrence's stuff being gone. It was to great discomfort that we both asked the question: who had really been living in our house this last week? During the next few days, Ben and I went on a mission, searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney's whereabouts. But they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence, though. No, he was still around, having made some new homeless friends. We encountered him several times begging on the streets, and I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he acted like he had never heard of him. The last time I would see Lawrence was across from work, attempting to break into a car. I'd called the police on him, and they arrived rather quickly, arresting him on the spot. While he was being led away by the police, I shouted after him one last time, "Where is Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just ignored me and let the cops drag him away. The next day, I filed a police report reporting Kearney as a missing person and suggested that Lawrence may know something about it, but nothing ever came of it. So, Lawrence, I don't know if you did something to Kearney or not, but if you did, let's not meet again. Updates. For those of you asking what happened to Neville the duck, we kept him for a while, but due to the malnourishment he had received his first few months, he never grew and ultimately passed away. for those asking if anything else ever came of this case, unfortunately not. I should probably add that South Africa has a unique way of closing cases, as in after a month or two, they just send you a text saying, "Case closed due to lack of evidence," or "Case closed with no arrests." I didn't get one in this case, but I did get one in an armed robbery I fell victim to back in 2017, so not too hopeful that they did too much effort there. Regarding Lawrence, I did see him one more time after getting him arrested. He was only locked up for about a week. After that, though, he disappeared. Not sure if he left town or got arrested again.